What happens when a father's moving day turns into a public spectacle because his neighbor calls the cops on him for simply loading boxes, and then loses it when his son shows up in uniform? The sound of tape ripping from a dispenser echoed in the empty living room. Cardboard boxes stacked by the door were labeled in black marker. Kitchen, books, garage. For Calvin Dorsey, it wasn't just the end of a long day. It was the end of years. Years of trying to fit into a neighborhood that never fully accepted him. At 54, he had grown tired of the subtle stares, the constant notices slipped under his door about minor infractions, and the way his next-door neighbor treated him like an intruder instead of a homeowner. That neighbor was Martha Kellerman. If you asked anyone on the block in Arlington, Texas, they'd tell you she had an opinion about every lawn, every mailbox, every vehicle parked too close to the curb. She wore the HOA badge of self-appointed enforcer like it was her birthright. And when she spotted the moving truck backing into Calvin's driveway that morning, she didn't see a man moving out. She saw what she called a violation waiting to happen. Calvin wiped the sweat from his forehead, lifted another box, and muttered, "One more trip, and that's it." His back ached, but he felt a strange sense of relief. A clean break from a place that had felt more like a cage than a community. That relief didn't last long. The sound of footsteps clicked sharply against the pavement. Calvin turned, already knowing who it was. Martha, in her pressed khakis and polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, marched straight toward him. "Mr. Dorsey," she snapped, her voice slicing through the morning air. "This moving truck is not authorized. Did you submit the proper paperwork to the HOA?" Calvin placed the box in the truck and leaned against the bumper. "Martha, I'm moving out. I don't think I need permission for that." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not how this works. Large vehicles must be cleared. And frankly, I don't even know if this truck belongs here." Calvin laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "Belongs here? I've lived here for 12 years. It's my driveway, my truck, my boxes." But Martha didn't budge. She crossed her arms and scanned the driveway like an officer on patrol. "Something about this doesn't sit right. People don't just leave without notice. I'm going to need proof you're actually the owner of this home." The box Calvin had just lifted slipped slightly from his grip. His patience was thinning. "You've been my neighbor for over a decade. You've sent me those warning letters. You know my name. You know I live here." Martha's lips tightened into a thin line. "I'm not so sure about that. Suspicious activity is suspicious activity." Calvin's chest tightened. He set the box down carefully, turned toward her, and asked, "You're really calling me suspicious for moving out of my own house?" Her hand already fumbled for her phone. "If you can't provide documents right now, then yes. I'll be calling this in." The moment felt unreal. Neighbors across the street began peeking through curtains, some stepping onto porches to get a better look. Calvin felt the heat of embarrassment crawl up his neck. Not because he was guilty, he wasn't, but because this spectacle was being staged in front of everyone on his last day here. He sighed heavily. "Martha, don't do this." But her fingers danced across her phone screen anyway. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report suspicious activity on Sycamore Drive. There's a man loading items into a truck. I don't think he belongs here." Calvin's jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists, not out of anger, but frustration. After years of swallowing his pride, here he was again, reduced to a suspect in front of his neighbors. She ended the call and looked him dead in the eye. "They'll be here shortly. You might want to stay put." For a second, Calvin considered arguing further, but the weight of exhaustion pressed against him. He had fought too many battles on this street. Instead, he muttered, "Unbelievable," and returned to his boxes. Across the street, a teenager pulled out his phone and started recording. A couple next door whispered to each other, shaking their heads. The scene had turned into a small spectacle. Calvin kept stacking boxes, but each slam of cardboard against the truck bed was harder, sharper, echoing the anger he was holding back. But just when the tension seemed like it couldn't grow any sharper, headlights appeared at the corner, and with them came the one person Calvin hadn't expected that morning, his son. But Calvin had no idea that Preston's arrival would turn this tense standoff into a storm the whole neighborhood, and soon the whole internet, would be talking about. The moving truck sat half-loaded in the driveway, a silent witness to the brewing storm. Calvin bent down to grab another box, trying to ignore Martha Kellerman pacing at the edge of the property line like a guard dog refusing to leave its post. Every time he glanced her way, her arms were crossed tighter, her eyes darting around the street as though gathering an audience for her performance. "You can keep moving boxes if you like," she said loudly, as if speaking not just to Calvin but to the neighbors now drifting outside. "But the police are on their way, and they don't take kindly to shady activity." Calvin straightened, his breath catching in his chest. He looked at her. Really looked at her. "You've known me for over 10 years. You think I'm shady because I'm moving? Come on, Martha. This is ridiculous." She pulled her sunglasses down onto her nose with a deliberate motion. "Rules exist for a reason. We have protocols. You can't just drag in trucks and load them up without prior notice. This community has standards." Calvin laughed, but it wasn't the kind that carried joy. It was sharp, tired, and heavy. "Standards? You mean your standards? Because I've seen plenty of other folks here move out or move in without you standing in their driveway with a phone in hand." Martha's cheeks flushed red. "That's different. They followed the rules. You didn't." Calvin stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "The only difference is me, isn't it?" The words hung in the air. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. One older man across the street rubbed his chin, while a woman whispered, "She's at it again." Martha didn't flinch. "Don't try to turn this around on me. You're the one who's acting suspicious. This truck could be stolen. For all I know, you're looting this place." Calvin's hands pressed into his sides. "Looting? This is my home, my furniture, my clothes, my memories. Do you really think I'd risk everything by breaking into a house I've lived in for over a decade?" Her voice grew shrill. "Well, I don't see any paperwork proving it." Calvin exhaled hard, his shoulders dropping. "Paperwork? Do you walk into everyone's home demanding to see their deed? Or is this just for me?" Silence spread through the small gathering of neighbors. Even the teenager recording from across the street lowered his phone slightly, as though weighing what he was hearing. Martha cleared her throat and lifted her chin higher. "The HOA exists to keep this neighborhood safe and orderly. I will not apologize for doing my duty." Calvin shook his head slowly, staring at the ground for a moment before looking back at her. "You confuse duty with control. There's a difference. A big one." The air was heavy now, thick with the kind of tension that makes every sound sharper. The slam of a car door 2 houses down, the bark of a dog, the faint hum of the moving truck's engine still idling. Martha broke the silence with another jab. "You should be grateful someone like me cares enough to notice. Most people would just ignore this and let trouble fester." "Trouble?" Calvin repeated, almost laughing again, but this time his voice cracked with fatigue. "Martha, I've raised my son here. I've paid every bill. I've never caused problems. The only trouble around here is you." The words landed hard. A couple of neighbors nodded quietly, but no one dared speak aloud. Martha's face tightened, her knuckles whitening around the phone she still clutched in her hand. Her voice was lower now, but sharper. "We'll see what the officers think when they arrive." Calvin rubbed his temples, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. He wanted to lash out, but he knew how these moments spiraled. They'll see a man helping his family move out. That's all. But even as he said it, he knew Martha wouldn't back down. Her whole identity was tied up in controlling this street, in making herself the final word on who belonged and who didn't. And if that meant dragging his name through the mud one last time before he left, she seemed determined to do it. From the porch of the house next door, a young couple whispered just loud enough for Calvin to hear, "She never goes after anyone else like this. It's always him." Calvin clenched his jaw, trying to hold on to what patience he had left. He didn't want his last memory of this street to be an argument. He wanted to leave quietly, with dignity. But that choice wasn't his anymore. Martha had made sure of it. But Calvin didn't yet realize that her stubbornness would collide with something she could never control, because Preston was about to step into the driveway. The morning sun climbed higher, pressing heat onto the asphalt as the scene in Calvin Dorsey's driveway drew more eyes. What began as a tense argument was now an event. A woman walking her dog slowed her pace to watch. A man in a pickup truck stopped at the corner, engine idling as he leaned out of the window. All of them caught bits and pieces of Martha Kellerman's sharp voice, carrying across Sycamore Drive like a bullhorn. Calvin set down a heavy box labeled kitchenware, wiped his brow, and muttered under his breath, "Just let me finish this move in peace." But peace was gone. Martha, phone in hand, paced a small circle on the curb as if rehearsing her next line. She dialed again, her voice crisp and deliberate. "Yes, this is Martha Kellerman, HOA representative for this block. I've already reported suspicious activity, but let me be clear. This man is loading items into a moving truck without proper authorization. He refuses to provide proof of residence. I need officers dispatched immediately." She ended the call with a snap, then glared at Calvin. "They'll be here any minute. Don't think you can just drive away. That truck isn't leaving until this is sorted out." Calvin's patience was unraveling. He stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "You called the police on me, again, for moving my own things. Do you realize how humiliating this is? How wrong?" Martha's voice rose even higher, ignoring the neighbors gathered. "What's wrong is people thinking they can bypass rules whenever they feel like it. This neighborhood has order. You can't just ignore it." From across the street, the teenager with the phone shouted, "Miss Kellerman, he lives there. Everyone knows it." Martha spun around, pointing at him. "Mind your business, Ryan. This doesn't concern you." Ryan didn't back down. "It does when you keep harassing people for no reason." His mother, standing beside him, tugged at his sleeve, but her eyes betrayed agreement. Calvin took a slow breath. He wanted to keep calm, but Martha's words cut deeper than he let on. "For 12 years, I've tried to be civil. I've paid every fee you demanded. I've trimmed my hedges exactly how you told me. And yet here I am, treated like a stranger in my own driveway." Her arms crossed again, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you followed the process, we wouldn't be here. Don't blame me for your negligence." Calvin laughed bitterly. "Negligence? No, Martha. This isn't about rules. It never was." The street fell quiet except for the faint rustle of trees. Martha stiffened but didn't respond, her lips pressed into a thin line. Another neighbor, an older man named Gerald, stepped off his porch. "Martha, I've moved out of 2 houses here. Never once had to ask permission for a truck. You're making a scene." Her head snapped toward him. "Gerald, stay out of this. You don't understand." "I understand plenty," he said firmly. "And it looks to me like you're targeting the wrong person." Calvin felt a small flicker of relief hearing Gerald speak up, but it didn't last. Martha's face twisted with indignation. She turned back to Calvin, her voice almost shaking with fury. "You think you can play the victim card? Not today. Officers will handle this." She looked around, as though trying to reclaim control of the crowd forming. "Everyone here will see the truth soon enough." Calvin shook his head, gripping the side of the truck to steady himself. "The truth is already plain, Martha. You just don't want to face it." A hush swept through the onlookers. People exchanged glances, whispered behind their hands, but nobody stepped forward. The air was thick with expectation, waiting for the arrival of flashing lights that Martha had promised. And yet, it wasn't the police cruiser that rolled into view next. Instead, a familiar sedan slowed at the corner, headlights reflecting off the moving truck. Calvin's shoulders dropped in both relief and surprise. The door opened, and out stepped Preston Dorsey, still in his navy blue uniform, badge glinting in the sunlight. At 28, he carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of training and an unshakable sense of duty. "Dad?" Preston called, walking up the driveway. "Need an extra set of hands?" Calvin let out a half laugh, half sigh. "You picked the perfect time." Martha froze, staring at the uniform. Her eyes flicked between Preston and Calvin, suspicion hardening in her features. She adjusted her sunglasses and spoke in a sharp tone. "And who are you supposed to be?" Preston extended a hand toward her politely. "Officer Preston Dorsey, City Police. I'm here to help my father move out." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Ryan raised his phone higher, whispering, "Oh man, this just got interesting." But Martha didn't blink. She took one step closer, her jaw tight. "Nice costume, but I don't buy it." But Preston's presence wasn't about to calm things down. It was about to push this standoff to a whole new level. Preston Dorsey adjusted the belt on his uniform as he stepped fully onto the driveway. His polished shoes crunched against the gravel at the edge, a subtle reminder that he had just come from work. He carried no bravado, no dramatic entrance, just a quiet, steady presence. Calvin felt the tension in his chest ease for a moment. His son had always been dependable, the kind of man who didn't waste words, but whose actions spoke louder. "Morning, Dad," Preston said, giving him a small smile before glancing at the half-loaded truck. "Looks like you've got more than a few trips left." Calvin exhaled, shaking his head. "Yeah, but it's not the boxes giving me trouble." He tilted his head toward Martha, who stood frozen, glaring at Preston like she had just spotted an intruder. Martha's lips pursed tightly. She scanned Preston up and down, her eyes landing on the badge clipped to his chest. "You expect me to believe you're law enforcement?" Preston's voice was calm, almost casual. "Yes, ma'am. I'm with Arlington PD. Just got off shift. Thought I'd lend my dad a hand." The neighbors stirred at those words. A woman whispered to her husband, "He really is an officer." Ryan, still recording, muttered, "This is about to go viral," but Martha scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't try to play games with me. Anyone can order a uniform online. And that badge, how do I know it's real?" Calvin stepped forward, irritation bubbling over. "Martha, this is my son. You've seen him around here for years. He's not pretending. He works for the police." She didn't budge. Instead, her voice grew louder, pitched high enough for the entire street to hear. "That's convenient, isn't it? You get caught, and suddenly your son shows up in costume. Well, I don't buy it. Not for 1 second." Preston kept his composure. He'd dealt with hostile suspects, frantic victims, and every sort of confrontation imaginable. Still, there was something surreal about standing in his father's driveway, accused of impersonating the very profession he'd devoted his life to. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you've made a serious allegation. Impersonating a police officer is a crime, but I assure you I'm not impersonating anyone. Here's my badge, here's my department ID. You're welcome to call dispatch and confirm it." He held out his wallet, the shiny metal badge glinting in the sun. Martha leaned forward, but didn't take it. She folded her arms tighter, her chin jutted defiantly. "I don't need to call anyone. I can already tell this is fake. You can wave that around all day, but I'm not fooled." Calvin's voice cracked with frustration. "What is wrong with you, Martha? He's showing you proof. What else do you want?" She turned on him, her finger stabbing the air. "What I want is honesty. You've been a thorn in this community for years. Late trash bins, grass a half-inch too high, guests parking overnight. And now, on your way out, you bring in some fake cop to intimidate me?" Calvin laughed bitterly. "Fake cop? That fake cop is my son who's risked his life every day for this city. He's earned more respect in 5 years than you have screaming at mailboxes." The neighbors gasped at Calvin's outburst. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but some smirked, clearly enjoying someone finally standing up to Martha. Preston lifted a hand, signaling for calm. "Dad, let me handle this." His tone carried authority, but also a subtle plea not to let anger take over. He turned back to Martha. "Ma'am, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to help my father. You've called the police, fine. They'll be here soon, and they'll confirm everything I've said. Until then, I suggest we all take a breath." But Martha's breathing grew heavier, faster. Her eyes darted to the crowd of neighbors and the teenager's phone camera. The more people watching, the more determined she became to assert control. "You can flash metal all you want," she spat. "But until those officers arrive, I'm treating you as a trespasser. Both of you." Preston's jaw tightened, but he remained still, steady. "Trespasser? I grew up in this house. My father owns this property. That moving truck has his name on the contract. How is this trespassing?" Martha's voice cracked with venom. "Because I said it is." For a moment, silence clung to the street. Calvin's fists clenched at his sides, the insult burning through him. But before he could answer, Preston stepped closer, his voice dropping low but carrying weight. "You're making a mistake," he said. "And when the real officers arrive, they'll see it too." But Martha wasn't ready to retreat. Instead, her defiance only hardened, pushing the confrontation toward a breaking point. The street had turned into a theater, with Martha Kellerman performing center stage. Neighbors leaned on fence, phones in hand, recording every word. Calvin Dorsey stood by the moving truck, arms folded, while his son Preston stayed steady, uniformed and calm, though his patience was thinning. Martha jabbed her finger toward Preston. "This is impersonation, plain and simple. You're not fooling me, and you're not fooling the police when they get here." Preston held her gaze. "Ma'am, I've already offered my badge and ID. If you're that doubtful, I encourage you to call my department directly. Dispatch will confirm who I am." She let out a sharp laugh, one that grated across the street. "Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? Probably have a buddy ready to answer, cover for you. That's how these scams work." Calvin stepped forward, unable to stay quiet. "Scam? Martha, are you even listening to yourself? You're accusing a sworn officer, my son, of fraud because you can't admit you're wrong." Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't raise your voice at me. This community has order. It's people like you who chip away at it. Late dues, uncut lawns, unsanctioned barbecues. You've been a problem since day one." Calvin threw his hands up. "Those were petty complaints, Martha. You called me out for letting my niece park in front of my own house for a single night. You fined me for putting a basketball hoop in the driveway. That's not order. That's control." The neighbors stirred at that, some whispering to each other, others nodding slightly. Ryan, still recording, whispered into his phone, "She's losing it." Martha's face reddened as she scanned the crowd. "Don't you all see? He's trying to manipulate you. This isn't about race. This isn't about bias. It's about rules. And rules don't bend just because someone cries victim." Preston spoke calmly but firmly. "This is about respect. Respect for the people you live beside. Respect for the truth when it's staring you in the face." He adjusted his badge so the sunlight caught it. "I worked last night's shift. I haven't even been home yet. You're accusing me of a felony in front of my own father and half the neighborhood. That's not just insulting, it's dangerous." Martha sneered. "Dangerous? The only danger here is a man pretending to be an officer, trying to intimidate me into silence." "Well, I don't scare easy." Calvin's voice cracked, filled with disbelief. "Silence? You're the loudest person on this street. You've made my life miserable for 12 years and now you want to drag my son into it? You've gone too far." The moment felt like a fuse burning toward an explosion. A few neighbors muttered agreement under their breath, but no one moved closer. Everyone seemed frozen, watching the storm unfold. Preston stepped toward her, his voice low but sharp. "I'm giving you fair warning. I've been patient. I've shown you identification. I've explained myself. If you continue to accuse me of a crime I haven't committed, in front of witnesses and cameras, you're walking into territory you don't understand." Martha stiffened, her shoulders squared. "Is that a threat?" "No," Preston replied, his tone steady. "That's a fact." The teenager Ryan couldn't help but whisper again, "Oh, this is wild." Calvin turned to Martha, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "Martha, stop this before it goes further. You don't have to do this. Let me move. Let me leave with whatever dignity I have left here." But her lips curled, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Dignity? You think you can walk away with dignity after the years of trouble you've caused? Not on my watch. I'll make sure everyone sees what you really are." The words hit Calvin like a slap. He looked at her, then at the crowd, and finally back at Preston. His son's jaw tightened, but he remained composed, refusing to let her drag him into shouting. Preston finally spoke, his voice cutting clean through the tension. "Ma'am, you're escalating a situation that doesn't need escalation. This is your last chance to step back." But Martha shook her head vigorously, pointing at the moving truck. "That vehicle isn't going anywhere, not until the police arrive. You're both trespassers, and I'm standing my ground." The crowd murmured again, some with disbelief, others with growing frustration. Gerald, the older neighbor from before, called out, "Martha, you're embarrassing yourself. Let the man leave." She snapped back without looking at him. "Stay out of it." Calvin rubbed his temples, exhaustion washing over him. "Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable." Martha planted herself firmly at the front of the truck, her arms spread wide, as though she could physically stop it from moving. Her voice shook with determination. "This truck doesn't leave. Not today." But by standing her ground so stubbornly, Martha had just pushed Preston into a position where his patience could no longer protect her. Martha Kellerman stood with her feet planted squarely in front of the moving truck, arms stretched like a gate, blocking Calvin's path to freedom. The Texas sun beat down, glinting off the windshield behind her, but she didn't budge. Neighbors whispered and shifted in the growing crowd, their phones raised higher. Calvin Dorsey clenched his jaw, silently praying his son wouldn't have to escalate this any further. Preston stepped closer, the leather of his duty belt creaking as he moved. His tone was measured, steady, but there was steel beneath it. "Ma'am, step aside. You are obstructing private property and interfering with my father's lawful right to move." Martha's laugh was sharp and cutting. "Lawful? You're both trespassing. And you," she jabbed her finger at him, "are impersonating law enforcement. No real officer would defend a man like this." Calvin's voice cracked. "A man like this? You mean me, Martha? Your neighbor? The guy who's been mowing his lawn 2 doors down from you for 12 years. She didn't answer him. Her eyes stayed locked on Preston, her voice climbing louder. "You can wave that shiny trinket all you want, but that badge doesn't mean a thing to me." Preston pulled the badge from his belt and held it up so the entire crowd could see. The sunlight flashed off the metal. "This is issued by Arlington Police Department. Badge number 4782. My name is Officer Preston Dorsey. You can call dispatch right now, and they will confirm it. I encourage you to do so." He held his wallet open too, showing his department ID, complete with photo and signature. He angled it toward the nearest neighbor. Gerald squinted, then nodded slowly. "That looks official to me," but Martha's arms only crossed tighter. "Counterfeit IDs are everywhere. Anyone with a printer can whip one up. You think I'm stupid?" Calvin threw up his hands. "Yes, actually I do. Look at it, Martha. He's giving you everything you asked for. Badge, ID, his name, even the number to call. What else do you want?" Her face flushed crimson as she turned to the crowd. "Don't let him trick you. This is intimidation, plain and simple. He's hoping the uniform will scare me off." Ryan, still recording, muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Pretty sure she's the only one intimidated right now." Preston lowered his badge slowly, tucking the ID back into his wallet with deliberate care. His voice carried weight, calm but unmistakably firm. "Ma'am, I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. I am a sworn officer of the law. You are interfering with my father's lawful move, and you are publicly accusing me of a felony I have not committed. If you don't step aside and stop obstructing this driveway, you're going to force my hand." Martha stepped closer, almost nose to nose with him, her voice trembling with outrage. "Force your hand? What are you going to do? Arrest me?" Preston didn't flinch. "If I have to, yes." The crowd gasped audibly. The weight of his words lingered in the thick summer air. Calvin's heart pounded. He didn't want it to come to that, but he could see it in his son's eyes. Preston wasn't bluffing. "Dad," Preston said softly, never taking his eyes off Martha. "I've given her every opportunity. I can't let her escalate further." Calvin swallowed hard. "Do what you need to do. I'm tired of this circus." Martha's laugh was shrill, almost unhinged. "Ha! Arrest me? For standing on my own street? You wouldn't dare." Preston's reply was calm but unwavering. "Don't test me, ma'am." Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she turned to the crowd again, desperate for validation. "You all see this, right? He's threatening me. This is harassment." But instead of nods of support, she was met with blank stares, folded arms, and a growing sense of disapproval. Gerald shook his head and muttered, "You've lost it, Martha." The silence that followed only fueled her desperation. She stepped back in front of the truck, arms spread wider, her voice cracking. "This vehicle isn't moving, not until the real police get here." Preston let out a long breath, his patience fraying. "Ma'am, this is your last warning." Martha's face twisted with rage. She pointed at him one last time. "You are a fraud, and I'm not moving. Do what you have to do." But with those words, Martha had crossed a line she could never take back, forcing Preston to act not just as a son, but as an officer bound by his oath. The tension on Sycamore Drive had thickened to the point where every sound seemed amplified. The hiss of the cicadas in the trees, the low rumble of the moving truck's idle engine, the faint chatter of neighbors recording with shaky hands. Calvin Dorsey stood by the open truck bed, his fists clenched at his sides, feeling every ounce of exhaustion and humiliation press against him. He wanted to yell, to scream at Martha Kellerman until her ears rang. But instead, he looked at his son, Preston, standing tall in his uniform, badge glinting in the sunlight. Preston had given her every chance, badge displayed, ID shown, warnings issued. Yet here she was, arms stretched out, blocking the truck like some kind of martyr for rules no one else cared about. "Ma'am," Preston said evenly, "step away from the vehicle. This is not negotiable." Martha's voice cracked as she shouted, "No! You think you can scare me with threats? You can't. This truck is staying right here until the real police arrive." Ryan, still filming from across the street, whispered to his phone, "She's about to get herself arrested. I can feel it." Calvin rubbed the back of his neck, muttering, "Lord, give me patience." He turned to Martha, his voice raw. "Martha, listen to me. Enough is enough. This is my property. This is my son. You're making a fool of yourself." But Martha's eyes darted around wildly, desperate for support. "Don't you see what's happening here? They're ganging up on me. He's not real law enforcement, and he's trying to bully me into silence." Gerald, the older neighbor, stepped forward from the crowd. "Martha, for crying out loud, the man's in uniform. He's given you his badge number. You're the only one here who thinks this is fake." Her head snapped toward him, her face blotchy with fury. "Stay out of this, Gerald. You've always had it out for me." Preston's patience thinned further. He took one measured step forward, his voice calm but carrying authority that made the neighbors hush. "Ma'am, interfering with a lawful move, blocking private property, and accusing an officer of impersonation without cause. These are serious matters. I am not repeating myself again." Calvin's chest swelled with both pride and fear. Pride that his son stood his ground with discipline, fear that Martha's stubbornness would push him to do something he didn't want to do. Martha's breathing quickened. Her hands trembled, but her voice rose even louder, cracking into the air. "You think your little badge makes you untouchable? You think you can just flash it around and make me disappear? No! I know my rights." Preston's voice hardened. "And I know the law. Step aside." She didn't move. Instead, she slapped her palm against the hood of the truck, her face twisted with rage. "This truck isn't going anywhere. Do you hear me? Not 1 inch." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Ryan nearly dropped his phone as he whispered, "Oh man, she really did that." Calvin took a step forward, his voice low but heavy with anger. "Martha, you've crossed the line. Get your hands off my truck." But she only pressed harder against the hood, her body trembling as if fueled by sheer defiance. "Make me!" The neighbors exchanged glances, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Some shook their heads, others looked down, embarrassed for her. A woman whispered, "This is out of control." Preston gave one final warning, his tone sharp, clipped, and unyielding. "Ma'am, remove yourself from this vehicle right now, or I will place you under arrest." Her laugh came out ragged, almost unhinged. "Arrest me? You wouldn't dare." He didn't blink. "Try me." Silence fell for a moment. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. Calvin's heart pounded so loudly he swore everyone could hear it. Martha stared at Preston, her eyes darting between his badge and his steady expression, waiting for some crack in his resolve, but there was none. And still, she refused. "No!" she spat, her voice breaking. "You can't arrest me. I'm the one protecting this neighborhood." Preston's shoulders straightened. "Protecting it from what? A man moving out of his own house?" Her words faltered, but she held her ground, pressing her hand harder onto the hood like it would anchor her to the moment. "From people who don't respect the rules." Calvin stepped closer, his voice hoarse. "The only person disrespecting anyone here is you, Martha." Her eyes flicked to him, her face twisted with contempt. "You don't belong here, Calvin. You never did." The crowd gasped. A woman on the sidewalk covered her mouth, and Gerald muttered under his breath, "That's it. She's gone too far." Preston's face hardened. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Ma'am, you are officially under arrest for obstruction." But the moment Preston reached for her wrist, Martha lashed out in a way that turned the confrontation from a shouting match into an undeniable crime. The words hung in the air like a hammer about to drop. Preston Dorsey had spoken with finality. "You are officially under arrest for obstruction." The crowd, silent now, leaned forward instinctively. Phones raised higher. Calvin felt his pulse in his throat. He wanted this nightmare over, but the sight of his son stepping into officer mode both reassured and terrified him. Preston moved slowly, deliberately. He reached for Martha Kellerman's wrist, speaking clearly. "Ma'am, place your hands behind your back." Martha recoiled instantly, jerking her arm away as though his touch burned her. "Don't you dare! You can't arrest me! I live here, I run this block, Ma'am, stop resisting!" Preston cut in, his tone still controlled but firmer now. "You are interfering with private property and refusing lawful commands. Put your hands behind your back." The neighbors murmured. Gerald shook his head, muttering, "She's doing this to herself." Ryan zoomed in with his phone camera, whispering, "Oh, this is going viral tonight." Martha shoved her palms flat on the hood of the truck, as if anchoring herself in place. "You're not taking me anywhere. Everyone here knows this is harassment." Calvin stepped closer, his voice desperate. "Martha, stop this. Don't make it worse for yourself. He's giving you a way out. Take it." Her head whipped toward him, eyes wild. "Stay out of this, Calvin. You think you've won? You think you're going to drive away laughing? No, not while I still stand here." Preston exhaled sharply. He knew where this was going. He'd seen it before. People so wrapped up in their pride that surrender felt like death. He raised his voice, addressing her like he would anyone on duty. "Ma'am, you are under arrest. Final warning. Hands behind your back." But instead of complying, Martha did the unthinkable. She shoved Preston's hand away, the force making the badge on his chest jolt slightly. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Calvin's stomach dropped. "Oh no." Preston's training kicked in. His voice snapped like a command. "Stop resisting." He grabbed her wrist, spinning her gently but firmly away from the truck. She twisted, flailing. "Help me!" she shrieked, eyes darting wildly to the neighbors. "He's attacking me!" But the crowd didn't move. Phones stayed raised. One woman muttered, "She lost it. Nobody's helping her now." Preston secured one wrist in a cuff with a practiced motion. Martha fought wildly, kicking back at him. "Get off me! I'm not going anywhere!" Calvin's voice cracked as he called out, "Preston, be careful!" "I got it, Dad," Preston replied quickly, keeping his movements controlled. He pinned Martha's free arm, guiding it behind her back despite her writhing. "Stop resisting! You're under arrest!" The metallic click of the second cuff closing rang louder than any shout. The crowd exhaled collectively, as though they had all been holding their breath. Martha froze for half a second, then erupted with fury. "You can't do this! I'll sue! I'll have your badge! Do you hear me?" Preston guided her gently but firmly away from the truck, speaking evenly despite her screaming. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for obstruction and resisting. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Her voice cracked into a shrill wail. "You think you've embarrassed me? You think this makes you a hero? Just wait. Everyone will know you're a fraud." But even as she shouted, the crowd's silence spoke louder. Neighbors shook their heads. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others whispered, "About time." Calvin leaned against the truck, his body trembling with a mix of anger and exhaustion. Watching Martha in cuffs should have felt like vindication, but instead it left him hollow. He muttered quietly, "All this, just for moving out." Ryan lowered his phone for a moment, whispering to his mother, "This is insane. I can't believe I just filmed this." Martha kicked at the pavement as Preston held her steady, guiding her toward the curb. She screamed at the top of her lungs, "I'm the victim! I'm the one protecting this neighborhood!" But no one clapped. No one defended her. The only sound was the whine of a siren approaching from a distance, the real police responding to the call Martha herself had made. Preston glanced back at his father, his face calm but tired. Calvin gave him the smallest nod, silently telling him he did the right thing. But as the patrol car turned the corner, the spectacle wasn't over, because the officers inside would have to decide what to do with one of their own in uniform standing over a handcuffed neighbor. The distant siren grew louder until a patrol car rounded the corner, lights flashing in the late morning sun. The vehicle slowed as it approached the cluster of neighbors, the moving truck, and Martha Kellerman, who stood cuffed at the wrists, still shouting like a town crier unwilling to step off the stage. "There! Finally!" she screamed, twisting toward the cruiser. "Officers, over here! Help me! I'm being assaulted by a fake cop!" The car stopped at the curb. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Officer Ramirez, tall and broad-shouldered, and Officer Klein, younger but with a sharp, watchful gaze. They scanned the scene quickly, noting Preston in his full uniform, Martha restrained, and a crowd of neighbors filming every angle. Ramirez's brow furrowed. "Preston, what's going on here?" Preston straightened, still holding Martha by the elbow. His tone was clear, professional. "Good morning. I responded as a private citizen to assist my father with his move. This woman interfered repeatedly, blocked his vehicle, and after multiple warnings, she resisted commands and struck my hand. She's under arrest for obstruction and resisting." Martha shrieked, cutting across him. "Don't listen to him. He's lying. He's not a real officer. He's impersonating one. Look at him. He just grabbed me in front of everyone." Klein glanced at Ramirez, then at the crowd. Gerald stepped forward immediately. "She's lying. We all saw it." He showed her his badge, his ID, everything. She wouldn't accept it. She blocked the truck, hit his hand when he tried to move her, and he cuffed her. "By the book." Ryan piped up, holding his phone high. "I got it all on video if you need proof," Ramirez sighed, rubbing his forehead. He looked at Preston. "You know this is messy. The optics, the fact it's your own neighbor. But I can tell she's not listening to reason." Preston nodded grimly. "I gave her every chance to walk away." Martha stomped her foot, rattling the cuffs. "I demand you arrest him. Right now. He's a fraud and this is harassment. I'm filing charges." Klein crossed his arms. "Ma'am, you are the one in cuffs. And from what I'm seeing and hearing, those charges won't be sticking the way you think they will." Her face twisted, a mix of rage and desperation. No, you don't understand. I'm protecting this neighborhood. I'm the only one who cares about the rules." From the sidewalk, someone muttered, "You care about control, not rules." Another added, "This was bound to happen." Calvin, who had stayed quiet until now, finally stepped forward. His voice was weary but firm. "Officers, I've lived here for 12 years, paid my dues, kept my lawn to code, never caused problems, except for this woman who's treated me like a criminal since day one. Today she called the police on me for moving out of my own house, and when my son showed up to help, she accused him of impersonating law enforcement." He looked directly at Martha, his eyes heavy. "All because she couldn't stand losing control." The silence afterward was heavy, broken only by Martha's ragged breathing. Ramirez turned to Klein, then back to Preston. "We'll take it from here. We'll log the incident, review the recordings, and file the report. But from what I'm seeing, your actions were justified." Preston nodded, handing Martha over carefully. Klein guided her toward the cruiser, but she fought every step. "This isn't over. I'll sue the HOA, I'll sue the city, I'll sue every single one of you. Do you hear me?" The neighbors barely reacted. Phones stayed raised, but their faces showed exhaustion, some even disgust. Ryan shook his head. "Lady, you're already internet famous. Good luck with that lawsuit." As Martha was placed in the back of the cruiser, her shouts muffled by the closed door, the street seemed to exhale. Conversations broke out in low voices. Gerald approached Calvin and Preston. "That was ugly, but you both handled yourselves. I hope this is the last headache she gives you." Calvin managed a tired smile. "It's my last day here, Gerald. She won't be my problem anymore." Preston placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to go through this today. You deserved a quiet move, not a spectacle." Calvin shook his head slowly. "Don't apologize. You stood up when it mattered. You showed her, and everyone else, what real authority looks like." For a brief moment, father and son stood silently in the driveway, the weight of the past hours heavy between them. The flashing lights reflected off the truck, off the faces of neighbors who would replay this scene for weeks. But as the cruiser pulled away with Martha still shouting in the back, Calvin realized this wasn't just the end of a bad day. It was the end of a long fight, and the beginning of something freer. The flashing lights faded as the patrol car turned the corner. Martha's muffled shouts carried off with it. The neighbors began to drift back toward their homes, some shaking their heads, others whispering to each other, but all of them still buzzing from what they'd just witnessed. Phones were already out, clips being sent to group chats, ready to hit social media before Calvin even had the chance to close the back of his moving truck. Calvin leaned against the bumper, his chest heaving. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, staring at the empty house behind him. For 12 years, that townhouse had been his safe haven, but also his battlefield. Every letter taped to his door, every fine from the HOA, every disapproving glance from Martha had chipped away at his peace of mind. And now, on his last day, it had erupted into something he never thought he'd see. His own son, in full uniform, handcuffing the very person who had tormented him. Preston came over quietly, his voice soft. "You okay, Dad?" Calvin chuckled, but it was a tired, broken kind of laugh. "I thought moving out would feel like closing a chapter. Instead, it feels like I just read the ending of a book I never wanted to open in the first place." Preston rested a hand on his father's shoulder. "Sometimes the ending's messy, but you're walking away free. That's what matters." Calvin studied his son, taking in the steady way he carried himself. Pride swelled in his chest. "You did good today, Preston. You kept your cool when I couldn't. You showed her what real authority looks like. You didn't let her drag you down to her level." Preston gave a faint smile. "It's what I'm trained to do. Doesn't make it easy, especially not when it's your dad in the middle of it." Gerald, the older neighbor, wandered over, speaking low so the rest of the crowd wouldn't hear. "For what it's worth, Calvin, I'm sorry it ended like this. She went too far. Most of us saw it for years, but we stayed quiet. Maybe we shouldn't have." Calvin met his eyes, nodding slowly. "Silence can hurt just as much as words, Gerald. But you spoke up today. That means something." Gerald gave a short nod and headed back to his porch, leaving Calvin and Preston alone by the truck. The silence between them lingered, filled with unspoken memories. Calvin thought about the first day he'd moved into the townhouse. Martha's tight smile as she handed him a welcome packet filled with restrictions. He thought about the countless letters. "Your grass is too high. Your trash bins are out too long. Your guests stayed too late." All of it leading to today. And yet, watching the patrol car disappear, Calvin realized something. Martha had been stripped of the one thing she valued most. Her power. Her voice, her control, her grip on the neighborhood had collapsed in front of the very people she sought to influence. Preston broke the silence. "This video's going to spread. You know that, right? By tonight, people across the city, maybe even the country, will see it." Calvin sighed. "Let them. Maybe it'll make folks think twice before treating their neighbors like suspects instead of people." The truck's engine hummed quietly as Calvin climbed into the cab. He looked back at the house one last time, his eyes tracing the windows, the door, the porch where he'd sat with his son on summer nights. He felt no nostalgia, only relief. "You ready?" Preston asked, standing by the passenger side. Calvin nodded. More than ready. They pulled away slowly, neighbors watching as the moving truck rolled down Sycamore Drive for the last time. Some waved, others just watched. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it was gone. Calvin let out a long breath, his shoulders easing for the first time that day. "Funny thing, Preston. You spend years fighting little battles, and then, on the day you're supposed to leave it behind, the biggest fight of all comes knocking." Preston smirked faintly. "At least this time, the fight ended the way it should." Calvin nodded, his eyes fixed on the open road ahead. "Yeah. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't mean shouting louder. Sometimes it means keeping your dignity when someone tries to strip it from you." For the first time in years, Calvin felt free. He knew the story would spread, that debates would spark online about bias, control, and authority. But for him, the lesson was simpler. Leaving behind a toxic place is not a loss. It's a step toward peace. And as the truck carried him toward that peace, he wanted others to remember one thing. Neighbors should be lifelines, not obstacles. And if you believe stories like Calvin's need to be told, don't forget to subscribe, because these stories aren't just entertainment, they're lessons in what it means to stand firm, find peace, and finally close the door on those who tried to hold you back.